The shallow, rasping breaths of the Daxamite elder, Kalen, barely stirred the opulent, bioluminescent silks of his sickbed, each exhalation a fragile protest against the silent indifference of the two Zidonian medics flanking him. Their crystalline diagnostic tools hovered, gleaming uselessly above Kalen's withered form. Their multifaceted eyes reflected not concern, but a cold procedural detachment, as lead medic Xyla intoned, his voice a series of precise, emotionless chimes. Galactic Concord Medical Mandate, 7.3 subsection Alpha. No extraordinary intervention for species whose natural lifespan conclusion is physiologically imminent without unanimous Grand Council pre-authorization. The Daxamite Elder's regenerative cycle has definitively ceased, but then the main airlock to the Daxamite flagship's command deck hissed open, and Paul Thompson, human xenolinguist and Earth's last-ditch diplomatic envoy, stepped through. His travel-worn synth leather jacket and the faded decal of the Terran diplomatic corps on his shoulder bag looked starkly out of place amidst the Daxamite's organic, flowing architecture, his gaze immediately locking onto the fading light in Kalen's ancient violet eyes. The Zidonian's pronouncement, cold and absolute as the vacuum outside, echoed in Paul's mind, a counterpoint to the sight of the Elder's labored struggle for each breath. A knot tightened in his chest. His diplomatic mission parameters, the carefully constructed protocols for first contact with the reclusive Daxamites, felt suddenly flimsy, irrelevant against the raw, universal fact of a life guttering out. A surge of something deeply human, an instinct to shield, to mend, to simply not stand by, warred with years of ingrained professional caution. The Zidonians might see a biological process reaching its ordained end. Paul saw a being who deserved a fight, not a footnote in a galactic mandate. He moved forward, his boots making a soft, alien sound on the deck plating. "Lead medic Xyla," Paul began, his voice even respectful, yet carrying an undercurrent that brooked no easy dismissal. "Forgive my interruption. This Mandate 7.3, is it absolute in all circumstances, particularly when considering an individual of Elder Kalen's apparent significance? Have all diagnostic avenues, every possibility truly been exhausted?" Xyla's crystalline head tilted, a minute, unreadable gesture. "Envoy Thompson," the chimes resonated, devoid of inflection. "The mandate is unequivocal for physiologically imminent natural lifespan conclusions. Grand Council pre-authorization is not pending. Your emotional input, while noted, is irrelevant to the established medical verity. Our advanced diagnostics confirm the Elder is beyond our established protocols for intervention. Further inquiry is unproductive." A small sound, almost a stifled gasp, drew Paul's attention. Standing slightly behind one of the flowing architectural supports near the sickbed was a younger Daxamite. Her features, though etched with a profound weariness and shadows of sleeplessness under her own luminous violet eyes, mirrored the Elder's noble cast. As Paul's gaze met hers, he saw surprise ripple across her face, quickly followed by a desperate, almost painful flicker of something that might have been hope. This had to be Celine, Kalen's granddaughter, the contact his mission briefing had mentioned. Paul turned fully towards her, his expression softening. "Celine," he said, his voice gentler now, "my deepest condolences for your grandfather's condition. It is a heavy burden to witness." He paused, then added, "Are there any Daxamite customs Any specific medical considerations or traditional knowledge pertaining to elders in this state that the Zidonian team might not be fully aware of? Sometimes, local understanding can offer perspectives that broader protocols miss. Celine stepped forward, her movements graceful despite her evident exhaustion. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, threaded with sorrow and a resonance unique to the Daxamite vocal structure. "Envoy Thompson, your concern is noted. We are grateful." A tremor ran through her words. "My grandfather, Kalen, he is the heart of our people, the repository of our history, our wisdom. But the Zidonians are the foremost medical authorities in the Concord. Their assessment, according to their laws, is final." Her gaze drifted back to Kalen, laden with a despair that felt absolute. Paul absorbed the scene. Kalen's life force dimming like a failing star. The Zidonians standing like statues of unyielding regulation. Celine's grief a palpable weight in the air. The official channels, the appeals to Zidonian authority, were clearly a barren path. A conviction solidified within him. If there was any hope, it wouldn't be found in the Galactic Concord's rulebook. It would be found in a detail overlooked, a question unasked, a perspective unseen by eyes too accustomed to their own advanced, yet perhaps limited, ways. He addressed Celine again, his tone one of quiet urgency. "Celine, I understand your respect for Concord procedures, but I operate from a different framework. To truly grasp what's happening, I need to see everything. Would you be willing to grant me access to all available unclassified medical data on Elder Kalen? Daxamite physiology records, the Zidonian diagnostic reports, anything that might help me form an independent understanding." He met her gaze directly. "My methods are analytical. I need to see the raw information from my own viewpoint." Celine stared at him, her luminous eyes searching his. For a long moment, the only sound was Kalen's faint, struggling breath and the low hum of the flagship's systems. Protocol Ward with a primal need on her face. Then a subtle shift. The fragile ember of hope he'd seen earlier seemed to steady, to glow a fraction brighter against the overwhelming darkness of her despair. "The Zidonians will not approve," she murmured, almost to herself. Then, looking at Paul with newfound commitment, she nodded slowly. "But they are not the only voice here any longer. I will grant you access, Envoy Thompson. Perhaps your perspective will see what has been missed." The holographic displays hummed around them, casting an ethereal glow on the ancient texts and complex medical schematics that filled Kalen's library. Paul's fingers danced across a holographic projection of a Daxamite circulatory system. His brow furrowed in concentration. The air hung thick, with the scent of ancient parchment and the faint, metallic tang of the ship's life support systems. Celine watched him, her violet eyes reflecting the frantic energy of the swirling data streams. "This enzyme," Paul said, his voice tight with focus, pointing to a highlighted section of the diagnostic report. The Zidonians dismissed it as insignificant age-related degradation, but in human medicine, elevated levels of tyrosine kinase 7 are a potential indicator of a very specific type of toxicity. Celine frowned, her delicate features etched with concern. "Tyrosine kinase 7. I'm not familiar with the Terran designation. However, that enzyme is normally regulated by the Helion node, a unique Daxamite organ responsible for maintaining metabolic balance. It does atrophy with age." Paul tapped the screen, bringing up a graph charting the Helion node's activity. Exactly. But look at the rate of atrophy documented in Kalen's records. It's abnormally accelerated, Celine. Significantly so. It's as if something is actively attacking it. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. I don't think this is solely due to old age. I think his condition is being exacerbated by an external factor affecting the Helian node. Possibly a rare toxin, or even an environmental contaminant present here on the ship. Revelation 2, not just old age. Celine shook her head, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The Zidonians ran extensive toxicology scans. They assured me there were no unusual substances present. Their scans might be calibrated for common galactic species, Paul countered, his voice gentle but firm. They might miss a Daxamite-specific toxin, something with a subtle energetic signature, or a compound that affects the Kalian node in a way their instruments aren't designed to detect. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Celine, I need access to the ship's environmental control logs. I want to see if there's been a malfunction, a recent change in the air filtration system, anything that might be introducing a harmful substance. Celine recoiled slightly, her hand instinctively moving to touch a crystal pendant around her neck. Accessing those logs requires high-level authorization. It would alert the Zidonians or other Daxamite officials to our investigation. We could be accused of undermining Concord medical protocols. Paul stepped closer, his expression earnest. Kalen's life is at stake, Celine. We can't afford to wait for bureaucratic approvals. We have to act quickly. I believe we can access the logs discreetly through a less monitored auxiliary terminal. It's a risk, I know, but... He reached out, gently taking her hand. Her skin felt cool and smooth beneath his touch. Think of Kalen, of his legacy. He wouldn't want us to stand idly by while his life ebbs away. He'd want us to fight. Celine hesitated, her gaze flickering between Paul's intense eyes and the holographic image of her grandfather. The weight of tradition, of duty, warred with the desperate hope that flickered within her. Finally she sighed, a sound like the rustling of silk. "All right," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll help you access the environmental logs. But we have to be careful. I know the ship's security systems. We'll take precautions to avoid detection." Alliance forged. The library faded behind them as they moved into the dimly lit corridors of the Daxamite flagship. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of ozone and lubricant. The rhythmic hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the deck plates beneath their feet. Paul followed Celine through a maze of twisting passageways, his senses on high alert. They reached an old engineering terminal tucked away in a less trafficked section of the ship. The terminal's screen flickered with static, its keyboard worn smooth with age. This was a relic from a bygone era, a forgotten corner of a technologically advanced vessel. Celine approached the terminal, her fingers flying across the ancient controls. Her movements were precise and confident, a stark contrast to the anxiety that had clouded her face moments before. Paul stood watch, his hand resting on the small energy pistol concealed beneath his jacket. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every hum and click of the ship a possible alarm. "Almost there," Celine murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. Bypassing the primary security firewall, rerouting access through the auxiliary maintenance network. The screen flickered, then perseveranced into a series of complex data streams. Celine scrolled through the logs, her eyes scanning the endless columns of numbers and symbols. Paul leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "There," Celine said, her voice suddenly sharp. A spike in Xylosian dust, used in the ship's atmospheric recalibration process, initiated 3 cycles ago, shortly before Kalen's rapid decline. The Zidonians dismissed its presence as within acceptable parameters, Paul noted grimly, reading the accompanying data. He quickly accessed his own datapad, cross-referencing Xylosian dust with human and galactic toxicology databases. The results were inconclusive. No immediate matches, he said, his voice permeated with frustration. But, wait a minute. The molecular structure, it's similar to a rare neurotoxin found on old Earth. A compound that disrupts neural pathways and causes rapid cellular degradation. Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Xylosian dust. In high concentrations, it's known to disrupt the Helian node's function, leading to accelerated enzyme imbalance. Her voice trembled. The Zidonians, they were aware of this potential side effect, but they deemed it a minimal risk. Paul and Celine exchanged a look of dawning horror. The pieces were falling into place. The Zidonians, while not intentionally harming Kalen, had underestimated the risk posed by Xylosian dust to an elderly Daxamite with a weakened Kalian node, adhering strictly to protocol while overlooking a crucial detail. There has to be a way to counteract it, Paul said, his mind racing, to neutralize the Xylosian dust and restore the Helian node's function. There is, Celine said, her voice regaining its strength. A compound derived from the crystal bloomers, a rare plant found in the ship's botanical gardens. It acts as a natural regulator, stabilizing the enzyme imbalance. Then let's get it, Paul said, his eyes burning with persistence. We can temporarily disable the ship's atmospheric recalibration system and introduce the counteragent. It's a simple solution, but it might just work. Lack of knowledge. Resources being addressed. Celine hesitated, her gaze darting around the dimly lit terminal. Disabling the system without authorization. It's a serious offense. It could have unintended consequences on the ship's environmental stability, endangering other Daxamites. Doing nothing guarantees Kalen's demise, Paul countered, his voice firm. The temporary disruption is a calculated risk worth taking. Celine, I believe in this. I believe we can save him, but I need you to trust me. Celine stared at him, her internal conflict playing out on her face. The weight of her responsibilities, her loyalty to her people, warred with her love for her grandfather, and her growing trust in this determined human. Finally, she nodded, her decision firm. All right, she said, her voice resolute. I'll help you implement your solution, but we do it my way. We need a fail-safe, a way to prevent any widespread environmental damage. Alliance forged. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped into Kalen's chamber. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of Daxamite bioluminescent plants arranged around his sickbed. Kalen lay motionless, his breathing shallow and raspy. Paul could feel the weight of the decision they were about to make, the potential consequences hanging heavy in the air. Celine moved to a control panel near Kalen's bed, her fingers poised above the activation room. Paul watched her, his heart pounding in his chest, ready to disable the atmospheric recalibration system. Scene start. Kalen's chamber night. The hum of the environmental controls vibrated through Paul's fingertips as he gripped the edge of the access panel, hidden behind a tapestry woven with shimmering bioluminescent threads. The air hung thick, with the scent of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid that he couldn't quite place. Celine, her brow furrowed in concentration, worked swiftly, her slender fingers dancing over the modified Daxamite data spike she was using to interface with the environmental control system. "Almost there," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the low thrum of the ship's engines. Security encryption bypassed. Now for the atmospheric recalibration override. Paul scanned the chamber, his gaze darting from the ornate, organically shaped furniture to the life support monitors displaying Kalen's fluctuating vital signs. He felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. They were walking a tightrope. One wrong step could have catastrophic consequences. As Celine initiated the override sequence, a low-level alarm blared, a sharp, insistent tone that cut through the ambient noise. Paul froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the small disruptor pistol concealed beneath his synth leather jacket. "Damn it!" Celine hissed, her eyes wide with alarm. "Routine system check. I can dampen it." Her fingers flew across the data spike, and the alarm abruptly ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. "False alarm," she breathed, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. "But we don't have much time." The atmospheric recalibration system shuddered, then fell silent. Paul pulled out his handheld sensor, its screen displaying a complex array of readings. He focused on one specific metric. "It's off. Xylosian dust flow has ceased. Concentration is dropping rapidly." Celine exhaled sharply, relief washing over her face. "Good. Now for the neutralizing agent." She retrieved a small, intricately carved object that resembled a ceremonial incense burner. Inside, nestled amongst glowing embers, was a concentrated extract from a rare Daxamite orchid, its petals shimmering with an ethereal light. "This should counteract the dust's effects," Celine said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a traditional remedy. My grandmother used to use it for respiratory ailments." As the orchid extract vaporized, a sweet floral scent filled the chamber, mingling with the metallic tang. Kalen's bioluminescent skin flickered erratically, and his breathing became more labored, a rasping, uneven sound that sent a jolt of fear through Paul. "Celine, his vitals. It's temporary," she said, her voice tight with forced reassurance. "It's just a reaction. The toxin is being neutralized. It has to get worse before it gets better." Suddenly the chamber lurched violently. Paul stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby console to steady himself. The artificial gravity seemed to fluctuate, pulling him one way, then another. "What was that?" he exclaimed, his voice imbued with alarm. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. We are experiencing a temporary gravitational anomaly affecting multiple sectors, including the medical wing. Please remain calm and secure all loose objects." Celine's eyes widened in horror. The recalibration system. Disabling it must have destabilized the gravity regulators. "I didn't know." Paul cursed under his breath. This was spiraling out of control. Other patients. This could be dangerous. He fought to maintain his balance, his gaze fixed on Kalen's monitors. Despite the gravitational instability, he focused on the data, noticing a subtle improvement in Kalen's neural activity, a slight decrease in the enzyme levels indicating Kalian node stress. "There's something," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "A flicker. It's working, Celine. The orchid extract is having an effect." A sharp rap on the chamber door shattered the tense silence. The door slid open, and some guards entered, their weapons held in their hands. Their leader, Captain Varus, A tall, imposing figure with a stern expression sat there, moved ahead. "Envoy Thompson," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "And Lady Selene, what is the meaning of this disturbance? We have reports of a gravitational anomaly originating from this chamber." He cast a suspicious glance at Paul, his eyes narrowing. "Your presence here is unsettling, Envoy. Explain yourself." Selene stepped forward, her chin held high. "Captain Varus, I take full responsibility. I was conducting routine maintenance on the chamber's environmental controls. A minor calibration error caused a temporary fluctuation in the gravity field." Varus's gaze remained fixed on Paul. "Routine maintenance? Then explain the unauthorized shutdown of the atmospheric recalibration system, Lady Selene. The Zidonians have assured us that the Xylosian dust is essential for the Elder's well-being." Paul stepped forward, meeting Varus's gaze. "Captain, with all due respect, I believe the Xylosian dust is exacerbating the Elder's condition. It's a neurotoxin, slowly poisoning him. We disabled the system to introduce a neutralizing agent." Varus scoffed, his expression incredulous. "Unfounded speculation, Envoy. The Zidonians are the galaxy's foremost medical experts. I will not allow you to interfere with their protocols based on your unscientific theories." He gestured to his guards. "Escort Envoy Thompson and Lady Selene to the security deck for questioning. I will report this matter to the Guild and the Regional Health Board." Selene stepped in front of Paul, her voice pleading. "Captain, please, you don't understand. My grandfather's health is at stake. We're trying to save him." As the guards moved to restrain Paul, a weak, raspy voice echoed from the bioluminescent sickbed. "Varus, stand down." All eyes turned to Kalen. His eyes, usually dim and unfocused, were now clear and alert, fixed on Captain Varus, the envoy, and my granddaughter. "They act with my consent." His voice was weak, each word an effort, but his tone brooked no argument. "Allow them to continue their work." Varus hesitated, his face a mask of conflict. Daxamite tradition demanded absolute obedience to an elder's direct command. "As you wish, Elder," he said, his voice stiff with reluctance. He turned to Paul and Selene, his eyes filled with suspicion. "But I warn you, Envoy Thompson, Lady Selene, I will be monitoring your actions closely. If the Elder's condition worsens, I will not hesitate to intervene." He gestured to his guards, and they turned and marched out of the chamber, leaving Paul and Selene alone with Kalen, the gravitational instability still present, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Paul turned back to Kalen's monitors, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to keep a close watch on him, Selene. This could go either way." But even as he spoke, Kalen's condition took a sudden, dramatic turn for the worse. His bioluminescence dimmed, fading from a vibrant violet to a faint, flickering glow. His breathing became shallow and erratic, a series of gasps and wheezes. The neural activity on the monitors flatlined, a stark line against the dark screen. "No!" Selene cried out, her voice filled with despair. "Grandfather, what have we done?" Tears streamed down her face as she rushed to Kalen's side, her hands hovering over his frail form. Paul, his mind racing, frantically initiated emergency medical protocols, drawing on a combination of human and Daxamite techniques, desperately trying to revive him. As he worked, his hand brushed against Kalen's chest, and a faint energy signature emanated from the Elder's body, a subtle pulse of bioluminescent energy that resonated with Paul's own bioelectric field, creating a strange, unexpected connection between them. Scene end. Kaelin's chamber night. Kaelin lay motionless, his fate uncertain, while Paul stared in stunned disbelief at his own hand, which was now faintly glowing with the same violet hue as Kaelin's bioluminescence, a sign of the unexpected energy transfer. "No, Paul, stop!" Celine cried, her voice cracking with despair. "You'll kill him." Captain Varus stepped forward, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. "I warned you, Envoy Thompson. Your human methods are clearly ineffective. Stand aside. I will contact the Zidonians." Paul ignored them both, his eyes fixed on Kaelin's still form. A faint tremor ran through his own hand, the one that had touched the elder. He could still feel something, a flicker of resistance. "He's not gone," he said, his voice low but firm. "I can still feel something. A faint pulse." "Pulse? I see no pulse," Varus barked, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "You are grasping at straws, human." "This is over." Paul shook his head, trying to articulate the alien sensations flooding his mind. "It's like trying to understand a language you've never heard before. A language spoken in feelings, in memories, in the dying echoes of a consciousness." He pressed his glowing hand to his temple, wincing. "It's overwhelming, but there's a pattern, a dissonance." Celine, despite her grief, looked at Paul with a flicker of intrigue. The violet glow emanating from his hand pulsed faintly, an anomaly she'd never witnessed in a human. "The joining?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Could it be the joining? The joining?" Varus scoffed. "That's ancient folklore, Celine. A myth for children." "It is more than myth, Captain," Celine countered, her voice gaining strength. "It is said that ancient Daxamite healers could, through a deep connection, share a patient's pain, their memories, even their very life force, to diagnose and heal." Paul looked at Celine, his expression a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. "You're saying I'm connected to him? That I can somehow feel what he's feeling?" Celine nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She took a bioscanner from her belt and ran it over Paul's hand. The device beeped erratically, displaying a chaotic jumble of energy signatures. "His bioelectric field. It's disrupted, altered. There's an energy signature here, unlike anything I've ever seen in a human." Varus remained unconvinced. Superstition and coincidence, nothing more. Celine ignored him, pulling a data slate from a nearby table. "The ancient texts speak of the joining requiring a willing participant, a strong emotional bond. It was a dangerous practice, often leading to the healer succumbing to the patient's ailment." She scrolled through the text, her brow furrowed. Paul, struggling to process the alien sensations, theorized. He sensed my desperation, my genuine desire to help. Maybe subconsciously he initiated this joining, hoping to transfer some knowledge, some life force, to aid in his treatment. The texts say it grants the recipient heightened senses. Celine continued, reading from the data slate. "A deeper understanding of the patient's condition, but also the risk of absorbing the patient's ailment, of becoming infected by their disease." Paul closed his eyes, focusing on the chaotic jumble of sensory input. He could feel Kaelin's failing organs, his weakening life force. But beneath the chaos, he sensed something else. a strange crystalline structure within his neural pathways. "There's something crystalline," he said, his voice strained, "inside his mind, like shards of glass, blocking the flow of energy." "Crystalline?" Celine frowned. "That's not a known symptom of Daxamite senescence." Paul concentrated, trying to filter the alien sensory input, focusing on specific biological markers and energy signatures. The crystalline structure resonated with a specific frequency, a dissonant hum that vibrated deep within his bones. "It's a frequency," he said, his eyes snapping open. "A bioacoustic interference, like white noise disrupting his neural functions." Celine gasped. "The crystal rot! It's just a legend, an old wives' tale." "What is it?" Paul asked, his voice urgent. "A forgotten Daxamite ailment," Celine explained, her fingers flying across the data slate. "Said to be caused by crystalline formations within the neural pathways. The ancient healers used focused sound waves to disrupt the crystals, to break them apart." "Sonic resonance," Paul murmured, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Like shattering glass with a specific frequency." "But the technique was dismissed centuries ago," Celine said, her voice tinged with doubt. "The Zidonians consider it pseudoscience, superstition. But it's worth a try, isn't it?" Paul pleaded. "If those crystals are blocking his neural pathways, disrupting his life force, we have to try something." Celine hesitated, then nodded, her dedication renewed. "There's an old sonic resonator, a device used by the ancient healers, in a forgotten storage room. I know where it is." "Then let's go," Paul said, turning to leave. "Wait," Varus said, his voice filled with suspicion. "What is this sonic resonator, and why are you continuing this?" "Charade. After the Zidonians have declared the Elder beyond help?" "Because I believe there's still hope, Captain," Celine said, her voice ringing with conviction. "And because Daxamite tradition demands that we explore every possibility, even those dismissed by outsiders." Paul and Celine hurried out of Kalen's chamber, leaving Varus standing alone, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. They found the storage room hidden deep within the Daxamite flagship, a dusty, forgotten space filled with relics of a bygone era. In the center of the room stood the sonic resonator, a large, ornate device covered in cobwebs and disrepair. Its crystalline components were cracked and broken, its power source long since depleted. "It's useless," Celine said, her voice filled with disappointment. "It's been broken for centuries." Paul examined the device, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its surface. "Not useless," he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Just dormant. I can fix this." "You? But you're a linguist, not an engineer," Celine protested. "I'm a quick learner," Paul said with a grin. "And I've always been good with my hands." He pulled a multi-tool from his bag and began to disassemble the resonator, his movements precise and efficient. Hours passed as Paul worked tirelessly, replacing broken components, rewiring circuits, and recalibrating the device's energy matrix. Celine watched him in awe, marveling at his ingenuity and his unwavering commitment. As Paul worked, Captain Varus entered the storage room, his face grim. "Envoy Thompson," he said, his voice imbued with impatience, "I demand an explanation. What is the meaning of this continued presence in this unauthorized location?" Paul didn't look up from his work. "I'm repairing the sonic resonator, Captain. We're going to use it to try and heal the Elder. The Zidonians have forbidden any further intervention, Varus said, his voice rising in anger. "I will not allow you to defy their orders. I must insist that you cease this activity immediately and leave the premises. If you don't comply with my orders, I will report you to the Zidonians." Selene stepped forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You will not, Captain. This is our ship, our tradition. We will not stand idly by while the Zidonians condemn our elder to die based on their cold, detached logic. This resonator may be Kalen's only hope, and we will not let it be taken away from him." Varus hesitated, torn between his duty to obey the Zidonians and his respect for Daxamite tradition. He looked from Selene's determined face to Paul's focused expression, and a flicker of doubt crossed his features. "Very well," he said, his voice grudging. "I will give you one more chance. But I will personally oversee the sonic resonance treatment, and if it fails, I will not hesitate to report you both to the Zidonians." Paul nodded, his attention returning to the resonator. Fair enough. He carefully calibrated the device, adjusting the frequency to match the dissonant hum he had detected during his joining with Kalen. Finally, the resonator was ready. Paul carried the device back to Kalen's chamber, followed by Selene and a wary Captain Varus. He positioned the resonator near Kalen's head, its crystalline components glowing with a soft, ethereal light. "Are you sure about this, Paul?" Selene asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. "This could be dangerous." "I don't know," Paul admitted, his face etched with worry. "But we have to try." He took a deep breath and activated the sonic resonator. A wave of focused sound energy washed over Kalen, causing his body to convulse violently. His bioluminescence intensified, then flickered and faded, leaving him motionless. Selene cried out in despair, believing the treatment had killed him. "No!" "What have you done?" But Paul, his senses heightened by the joining, detected a faint pulse of neural activity, a sign that the crystalline structure may be breaking down. "Wait," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's still something there." He looked at the resonator, his mind racing. He needed to increase the intensity, to deliver a more powerful pulse of sonic energy. But it was a desperate gamble. It could save Kalen, or it could destroy him completely. Ignoring Selene's protests and Captain Varus's skepticism, Paul reached for the resonator's power dial, his hand trembling with a mixture of fear and grit. He prepared to administer a second, more intense pulse of sonic energy, convinced that it was the only way to save Kalen, despite the immense risk. The second sonic pulse ripped through Kalen's chamber, a focused lance of energy guided by the joining's strange, alien symphony. Paul ignored Selene's strangled cry, the tremor in her linked hand, the sharp bark of Captain Varus's order. His world narrowed to the hum vibrating through the resonator's frame, the flickering readouts, displaying the frequency's delicate balance, the faint, almost imperceptible feedback from Kalen's neural pathways. Then, silence. The bioluminescent silks draped over Kalen's form, moments ago shimmering with an unnatural light, went dull. The violet glow faded from his skin, leaving him pale and still against the dark fabric. The monitors flatlined. Selene's hand slipped from Paul's. She stumbled back, a choked sob escaping her lips. "No, grandfather, no." Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed beside the bed, her slender frame racked with grief. "Thompson, stop this madness!" Varus's voice was a thunderclap, his hand hovering over the disruptor pistol at his hip. "You've killed him. I gave you a chance and you murdered the elder." Paul barely registered the accusation. He kept his gaze fixed on the neural activity display, his fingers dancing across the resonator's controls. There, a flicker, a faint, almost subliminal rhythm beneath the flatline. It was there. "He's not gone," Paul said, his voice low but firm, cutting through Varus's rage and Celine's despair. The crystalline structure, it's still there, breaking down, but stubbornly persistent. He risked a glance at Celine, his expression pleading. "It's like scar tissue, Celine, incredibly resilient. It needs a sustained frequency, carefully calibrated." Varus lowered his weapon slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing his stern features. "Explain yourself, human." Now, Paul took a deep breath, trying to articulate the alien process in terms they could understand. "The crystalline structure isn't just a foreign object, Captain. It's integrated itself into Kalen's neural pathways, mimicking his own bioelectric signature. That's why it's so difficult to disrupt. We need to find the resonant frequency that will shatter the crystalline matrix without destroying the underlying neural tissue. It's like shattering a glass without breaking the table it's sitting on." Celine looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, but filled with a fragile hope. "Is it possible?" "I don't know," Paul admitted, his gaze returning to the monitors. "But I'm not giving up. Not yet." Varus hesitated, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "Even if what you say is true, human, we are treading on dangerous ground. We need guidance." "A medical expert." Celine wiped her tears, her voice regaining its strength. "There is Elder Lyra. She resides in the mountain monastery of Xylos. She is renowned for her knowledge of ancient sonic therapies, techniques long forgotten by modern Daxamite medicine." Varus scoffed. "Ancient therapies, superstition? We need advanced medical science, not folklore." "Lyra is more than just a healer, Captain," Celine insisted. "She is a master of biosonics. If anyone can understand the complexities of this crystalline interference, it is she." Varus weighed his options, his expression grim. "The journey to Xylos is perilous, Celine. Time-consuming. Every moment we delay further endangers the Elder's life." Paul stepped forward. "We don't have to go there. We can use the ship's communication array to transmit the sonic frequency data directly to Lyra. She can analyze it remotely and provide guidance, fine-tune the resonator's parameters." Varus frowned. "That is a logical suggestion, but the communication array is heavily monitored. Any unauthorized transmission will be detected immediately." As Paul attempted to establish a communication link with Lyra, a wave of static crashed through the system, blanketing the screen in a snowstorm of white noise. The audio crackled with interference, rendering any coherent communication impossible. "What's happening?" Celine asked, her voice imbued with concern. "Interference," Paul replied, his fingers flying across the console. "But it's not random. It's structured, almost coded." He activated the linguistic analysis program, feeding the interference pattern into the system. The program whirred, analyzing the complex waveforms, comparing them to known communication protocols. "It's a form of coded communication," Paul announced, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Someone is actively trying to block our contact with Lyra." Celine's eyes widened. "The Obsidian Guard. They oppose my grandfather's progressive policies. They would benefit greatly from his death." Varus's lips pursed. "Political actions during a sick elder's decline. Unpleasant, but not unexpected." "We can't use the ship's communication array," Paul said, his mind racing. "It's too closely watched. But there's another way." A clandestine, short-range transmitter. Risky, but it might work. Varus nodded grimly. I will provide discreet assistance. But be warned, human, if you are discovered, the consequences will be severe. Working quickly and silently, Paul and Celine bypassed the ship's main communication system, rerouting power to a small hidden transmitter tucked away in a disused maintenance bay. The air crackled with anticipation as they initiated the signal, sending a burst of encrypted data towards the Xylos monastery. A moment of agonizing silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the frantic beat of their own hearts. Then, a faint signal flickered on the screen, a fragile thread of connection across the vastness of space. We have a link, Paul whispered, his voice filled with relief. It's Lyra. A holographic image flickered into existence, resolving into the serene face of an elderly Daxamite woman, her eyes filled with wisdom and compassion. Envoy Thompson, Lyra said, her voice calm and steady despite the interference. I have analyzed the data you transmitted. Your diagnosis is correct. The elder Kalen is suffering from crystalline interference. Can you help him, Elder Lyra? Celine pleaded, her voice trembling with hope. I can, Lyra replied, but the frequency you are using is incomplete. I will provide you with a modified sonic frequency, one that is specifically attuned to the crystalline structure within Kalen's neural pathways. But be warned, Lyra continued, her expression growing serious. This modified frequency is highly unstable. It carries a significant risk of causing irreversible neural damage if not administered with extreme precision. You must proceed with extreme caution. Paul nodded, his mind already racing, calculating the risks and benefits. I understand, Elder Lyra. I will be careful. He turned back to the resonator, his fingers adjusting the controls, inputting the modified frequency data. As he did so, a warning light flashed on the console, accompanied by a shrill alarm. What is it? Celine asked, her voice filled with alarm. The resonator, Paul replied, his brow furrowed in concern. It's overheating. The power core is nearing critical failure. Celine's eyes widened in horror. Sabotage. Someone is deliberately overloading the system. The realization hit them both like a physical blow. There was an enemy agent on board, someone who wanted Kalen dead, someone who was willing to risk destroying the entire ship to achieve their goal. Paul looked from the overheating resonator to the still lifeless form of Kalen. He knew he was running out of time. I have to proceed, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. It's Kalen's only chance. He turned to Celine, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. I need you to stabilize the power core, manually. It's the only way. Celine didn't hesitate. Without a word, she moved to the access panel, her fingers flying across the controls, her face etched with perseverance. She knew the risks. She knew that if the resonator exploded, they would both be killed. But she also knew that Kalen's life was worth fighting for, worth risking everything. Paul took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the monitors, his fingers hovering over the activation switch. He could feel the heat radiating from the resonator, the air thick with the smell of ozone. Ready, Celine? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ready, she replied, her voice filled with unwavering purpose. Paul closed his eyes, focusing all his concentration on the task at hand. He activated the modified sonic frequency, sending a surge of energy through the resonator and into Kalen's body. The chamber filled with a blinding light, a deafening roar. The ship shuddered violently. Kalen's body remained motionless, but on the neural activity display a new pattern emerged. A complex, chaotic waveform that slowly began to coalesce, to stabilize. And on Kalen's skin, faint lines of crystalline structure began to visibly dissolve, fading like frost in the morning sun. Then, a voice, weak but clear, echoed through the chamber. "Beware the serpent within the Concord." Kalen lapsed back into unconsciousness. The violet light in Kalen's chamber seemed to pulse with his shallow breaths. Paul and Celine exchanged a worried glance. Her brow ridges, normally smooth, were furrowed with concern. What did he mean? Celine whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the life support systems. About the danger? Before Paul could answer, the chamber doors hissed open, and Commander Varus strode in, his expression tight. "Envoy Thompson," he barked, his voice amplified by his command carapace. The elder spoke of a threat, a sabotage. "I require immediate clarification." Was he referring to a direct attack on this vessel? Paul ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion etched on his face. "Commander, with all due respect," the elder was barely conscious. "I only caught fragment. Resonator. Obsidian. Watch the shadows." It was disjointed. I need time to analyze the nuances of his phrasing. Celine stepped forward. "Commander, the Obsidian Guard. They are a traditionalist faction, deeply distrustful of outsiders. They have always resented the Concord's influence." Varus scowled. "Are you suggesting the Obsidian Guard sabotaged the sonic resonator?" "It is a possibility we cannot ignore," Celine replied, her voice firm. "Their ambition for power is well known." Paul nodded. "I can try to isolate the key phrases, see if there's a coded message. Daxamite language is rich in subtext, but it will take time." He gestured towards the data slate he still held. "I'll need a clean audio feed of Kalen's warning." "See that you get it," Varus ordered, turning to leave. "I have a ship to secure." As Varus departed, Celine moved to a console near Kalen's bed. "I will examine the resonator myself. Perhaps I can ascertain the method of sabotage." Paul watched her, then focused on the recording. He activated his translator, the device humming softly as it processed the garbled audio. He isolated each word, each inflection, meticulously dissecting Kalen's final warning. The elder's voice, normally a resonant baritone, was now a raspy whisper, barely clinging to life. Meanwhile, Celine worked with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across the console. The holographic schematics of the sonic resonator shimmered in the air. After a few moments, she turned to Paul, her expression grim. "The power core was deliberately damaged," she announced, "with a sophisticated energy weapon. This was no accident. And the precision, it indicates an experienced saboteur." Varus's voice boomed over the ship's comm system. "Attention, all personnel. This vessel is now under full lockdown. All decks are to be considered restricted. Security teams, report to your designated stations. I want a thorough search of every compartment, every access way." "Find the saboteur," Paul frowned, pausing the recording. "A ship-wide lockdown? That's excessive, isn't it?" "Perhaps," Celine replied, her voice low. "Or perhaps Varus suspects the culprit is someone in a position of authority, someone capable of bypassing security protocols." Hours passed. Paul, fueled by stimulants and a growing sense of urgency, continued to analyze the recording. He focused on the subtle variations in Kalen's voice, the almost imperceptible pauses between words. Then he saw it, a pattern, a hidden layer of encryption woven into the very fabric of the elder's dying words. "Celine," he said, his voice tight with excitement, "I think I've found something, a series of coordinates. They're embedded within the audio signal." Celine rushed to his side, peering at the data stream. "Coordinates? Where do they lead?" "I am cross-referencing them with the ship's schematics now," Paul replied, his fingers flying across the console. A moment later, a holographic map of the Daxamite flagship appeared, a single point highlighted in crimson. The coordinates point to a specific location within the ship, a restricted section of the data archives. Celine's eyes widened. The data archives? But that area is heavily guarded. It contains classified information about Concord military operations and Daxamite political alliances. "Exactly," Paul said grimly. "Someone is trying to access or manipulate sensitive information. And Kalen knew about it." "We must investigate," Celine declared. "But how do we get past the lockdown?" Just then, a private comm channel opened on Paul's translator. It was Varus. "Envoy Thompson, Lavari," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I have reason to believe the lockdown is compromised. I cannot openly defy Concord regulations, but I can provide you with a temporary access code. Meet me at Sector Gamma 7 in 15 minutes. I will explain further." Paul and Celine exchanged a look. Trusting Varus was a risk, but they had no other choice. 15 minutes later, they arrived at Zone Gamma 7, a dimly lit passage near the ship's technical area. Varus awaited them, near 2 armed security staff. "The access code will allow you to bypass the primary security checkpoints," Varus explained, handing Paul a small data chip. "But be warned, the Obsidian Guard has a strong presence near the data archives. They may try to stop you." "Why are you helping us, Commander?" Paul asked, his eyes narrowed. "Because I swore an oath to protect the Daxamite people," Varus replied, his voice resolute. "And I believe the Elder's warning must be heeded, but tread carefully, Envoy. There are forces at play here that are far greater than you can imagine." As Paul and Celine approached the data archives, they encountered resistance. A group of figures in dark clothes held items, blocked their way. "Halt!" the leader called out, voice changed by the helmet. "Entry is restricted here. You are not authorized to proceed." "We have direct orders from Commander Varus," Celine replied, her voice firm. "Stand aside. Those orders are invalid," the squad leader retorted. "You are under arrest for violating Concord security protocols." Without warning, the Obsidian Guard soldiers opened fire. Paul and Celine dove for cover, energy blasts whizzing past their heads. "Looks like diplomacy is off the table," Paul muttered, drawing his sidearm. The corridor erupted in a cacophony of energy fire. Paul, relying on his quick reflexes and improvised tactics, used the environment to his advantage, ducking behind crates and ricocheting shots off the walls. He stopped the lead guard there. He grabbed the guard's lost weapon to slow the group, so Celine could circle around. Celine, with a cry of rage, charged forward, her hands glowing with Daxamite energy. She slammed into the squad leader, knocking him off his feet, and then unleashed a torrent of energy blasts, disabling the remaining soldiers. Breathing heavily, Paul surveyed the scene. The Obsidian Guard soldiers were unconscious, their weapons scattered on the floor. "That was intense," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We must hurry," Celine replied, her voice urgent. "They will send reinforcements." They secured the entrance to the data archives and stepped inside. The room was vast and dimly lit, filled with rows upon rows of data storage units. Holographic displays flickered with streams of encrypted information. Paul immediately began searching for the data logs related to Concord military operations and Daxamite political alliances. Celine, meanwhile, examined the security systems, looking for any signs of tampering. After several minutes of intense searching, Paul found what he was looking for: a clandestine communication channel, hidden deep within the data stream. He decrypted the message and his eyes widened in shock. "Celine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to see this." Celine rushed to his side, peering at the holographic display. The message was a direct communication between a member of the Concord Council and a leader of the Obsidian Guard. It outlined a plan to destabilize the Daxamite government, to undermine Kalen's authority, and to install a more compliant regime. "This is treason," Celine gasped. "They plan to challenge our policies." After data review, they noted a serious issue: a detailed schematic of the sonic resonator, with annotations highlighting its vulnerabilities and suggesting methods of sabotage. Someone within this ship provided the Obsidian Guard with the information they needed to disable the resonator, Paul said grimly. "A traitor in our midst." Suddenly, the lights in the data archives flickered and died. The doors slammed shut, sealing Paul and Celine inside. A cold metallic voice echoed over the intercom. "Envoy Thompson, Celine Lavari," the voice announced. "You are under arrest for treason against the Concord. Your actions have been deemed a threat to galactic stability. Surrender immediately." Paul and Celine exchanged a look of horror. They had been trapped. Varus's voice crackled over Paul's translator. "Envoy! Celine!" "What is happening?" "I am attempting to override the lockdown, but my command codes have been revoked. I have been betrayed." Paul cursed under his breath. They were on their own. He quickly assessed their situation. The doors were sealed. The security systems were impenetrable. But there was one possibility. He remembered a hidden access panel he had noticed earlier, concealed behind a row of data storage units. "Celine," he said, his voice urgent, "there's a hidden escape route. I saw it earlier. It might lead us to a less monitored section of the ship." Working together, they moved the data storage units, revealing a narrow passageway. Paul, using his knowledge of alien technology, quickly bypassed the security protocols, unlocking the panel. "This way," he said, gesturing for Celine to follow. They squeezed through the passageway, emerging into a dimly lit maintenance corridor. They were still trapped, but they had bought themselves some time. Before they could proceed, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. It was Zyla, the lead Zidonian medic. "Envoy Thompson," Zyla said, his voice cold and emotionless. "Celine Lavari. I had hoped you would not make this so difficult." Paul stared at the Zidonian, his mind turning. "Zyla, you're the traitor?" Zyla nodded slowly. "I have been working with the Obsidian Guard to ensure Kalen's death and pave the way for a more compliant Daxamite government." "But why?" Celine demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "Why would you betray us?" Kalen's progressive policies threatened the Concord's control over the Daxamite system, Zyla explained. "His death was deemed necessary to maintain stability. A difficult decision, but a necessary one." You murdered him?" Paul stammered. "His death was expedited," Zyla corrected. "A matter of galactic necessity." He raised a small energy pistol, pointing it at Paul and Celine. "Now I must ask you to surrender, and to reveal the location of the encrypted data you discovered in the archives." Paul raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "All right, Xyla, you win. Just don't hurt us." But as he spoke, his eyes flickered towards a loose panel on the wall behind Xyla. He took a step forward, feigning compliance. "The data is stored on this chip," Paul said, holding out the data chip he had received from Varus. "It's all there." Xyla reached for the chip, his eyes fixed on Paul. In that instant, Paul lunged forward, kicking the loose panel with all his might. The panel slammed into Xyla's arm, knocking the energy pistol from his grasp. "Now, Selene!" Paul shouted. Selene, reacting instantly, charged towards Xyla, her hands crackling with Daxamite energy. Selene roared, a primal sound Paul hadn't known she possessed. Her hand, augmented with Daxamite strength, snapped out, colliding with Xyla's crystalline jaw. The medic staggered, his multifaceted eyes widening in shock, as Selene wrestled him to the floor, pinning his slender limbs with surprising force. Paul, still reeling from the revelation of Xyla's betrayal and the threat to Kalen, hesitated only a moment. Pacifism was a luxury he couldn't afford. He moved to assist Selene, grabbing a discarded data cable and looping it around Xyla's wrists, securing them tightly. "Selene, are you all right?" Her violet eyes blazed with fury. "He would have let my grandfather die. He helped them try." She spat the words, her grip tightening on Xyla's arm until a faint cracking sound echoed in the small archive. "We need information," Paul urged, his voice calm but firm. "Why? Who ordered this?" He knelt beside Selene, his hand hovering over Xyla, ready to intervene if necessary. Xyla, regaining his composure, fixed Paul with a chillingly detached gaze. "You believe your emotional appeals will sway me, human? I am a Zidonian. Logic dictates my actions." Selene snarled, pressing harder on Xyla's arm. "Logic also dictates self-preservation. Tell us what we want to know, or I will dissect you, crystal by crystal." Xyla remained silent for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that sounded like air escaping a punctured vessel, he relented. "It was Councillor Morak." Paul frowned. "Morak? The Concord Council member? Why?" "Morak believes Kalen. Progressive policies are destabilizing the Concord's control over the Daxamite system. He sees Kalen as a weakness. His death, Morak argues, is a needed adjustment." Selene's breath hitched. "And the Obsidian Guard? What role do they play?" "They are Morak's agents. They plan to take control of this flagship. They intend to use it to launch a series of targeted strikes against Concord outposts, blaming it on Daxamite insurgents, to spark a system-wide conflict." Xyla's voice was barely a whisper, as if admitting the truth physically pained him. Before Xyla could elaborate on the location of the hidden data Kalen was trying to protect, a deafening crash echoed from the corridor outside. The archive door buckled inward, showering them with sparks and twisted metal. A squad of Obsidian Guard soldiers clad in black armor that absorbed light stormed into the room, blasters raised. "They know," Selene shouted, shoving Paul behind her. "Run!" Paul didn't hesitate. He grabbed Selene's hand, pulling her towards a service hatch concealed behind a stack of deactivated data servers. The Obsidian Guard opened fire, plasma bolts searing the air where they had stood moments before. They scrambled through the narrow hatch, plunging into the labyrinthine network of maintenance corridors that snaked through the Daxamite flagship. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and coolant, the only light coming from flickering emergency lamps. "Where are we going?" Paul asked, his voice tight with adrenaline. I know this ship, Celine replied, her voice grim. There are passages the Obsidian Guard won't expect. They navigated the twisting corridors, the sounds of the pursuing soldiers growing fainter. Celine led them through a series of hidden doorways and ventilation shafts, her knowledge of the ship's layout proving invaluable. Suddenly, a voice boomed from a nearby intersection. "Celine, it's Varus. Are you all right?" A figure emerged from the shadows, clad in the crimson armor of a Daxamite officer, a squad of loyal soldiers flanking him, their blasters trained on the corridor ahead. It was Varus, his face etched with grit. "Varus, what's happening?" Celine asked, relief flooding her features. "The Obsidian Guard is consolidating its control. They've locked down most of the command deck. But I've managed to rally a few loyalists. We need to expose this conspiracy." Varus paused, his expression hardening. "They're preparing to activate the ship's self-destruct sequence. They intend to destroy the flagship, eliminate all evidence, and blame it on a Concord attack." Paul's mind raced. The self-destruct, that would destroy everything, including any chance of proving Kalen's innocence, or even stopping Mora. "We have to stop them." "I know how," Paul said, his voice gaining confidence. "Daxamite security relies on verbal command codes. If I reach the main hub, I can make a reversion. A stop code." Celine frowned. "It's too risky. The engineering core will be heavily guarded. We don't have a choice." Paul looked at Celine, his eyes pleading. "We have to try." Celine hesitated, her gaze flickering between Paul and Varus. She still harbored doubts about Varus, remnants of past rivalries and ingrained distrust. But she knew Paul was right. "All right," she said, her voice resolute. "I'll help you. But Varus, I'm trusting you. Don't betray that trust." Varus nodded, his expression solemn. "You have my word, Celine. Now let's move. We don't have much time." Together, Paul, Celine, and Varus, along with their small group of loyal soldiers, made their way towards the ship's engineering section. The corridors grew increasingly fortified, with Obsidian Guard soldiers patrolling every intersection. As they rounded a corner, they were met with a hail of plasma fire. The Obsidian Guard had anticipated their move. A fierce battle erupted, the narrow corridors echoing with the roar of blasters and the cries of the wounded. Paul, despite his lack of combat experience, moved with surprising agility, using his quick thinking and knowledge of the ship's layout to outwit the Obsidian Guard soldiers. He led the Allied soldiers, finding openings in the foe's defenses and adapting plans quickly. Celine and Varus shot, energy beams making the guard duck fast. Suddenly, a hit struck Celine, hitting her side. She cried out, clutching her wound, her face contorted in pain. Paul rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. The wound was severe, the flesh around it blackened and smoking. "Celine, are you all right?" "I'll be fine," she gasped, her voice strained. "Just go. Stop them." Paul hesitated, torn between his duty to stop the Obsidian Guard and his desire to protect Celine. Every instinct screamed at him to stay with her, to shield her from further harm. Varus stepped forward, his expression grim. "Go, Paul. I'll stay with her. You're the only one who can disable the self-destruct sequence. We'll hold them off as long as we can." Paul looked at Celine, her eyes pleading with him to go. He knew Varus was right. He couldn't afford to hesitate. "I'm trusting you, Varus," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Take care of her." He reluctantly entrusted Celine to Varus's care, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. He turned and ran towards the engineering section, his mind racing with the knowledge that the fate of the Daxamite flagship, and perhaps the entire Concord, rested on his shoulders. Varys helped Selene to her feet, supporting her as they retreated into a nearby alcove. "We need to find somewhere safe," he said, his voice low. "Somewhere they won't find us." Paul, meanwhile, sprinted through the deserted corridors, his blaster held at the ready. He knew the Obsidian Guard would be expecting him. He had to find a way to reach the engineering core undetected. He spotted a maintenance panel on the wall, its cover slightly ajar. He pried it open, revealing a narrow access tunnel. It was a tight fit, but he managed to squeeze through, plunging into darkness. He crawled through the tunnel, his hands scraping against the metal walls. The air was stale and musty, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Finally, he reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into a small, hidden compartment within the engineering section. It was a cramped space, barely large enough to stand in, but it offered a temporary refuge. He slumped against the wall, catching his breath, his mind racing with possibilities. He had to find a way to access the ship's control systems, to disable the self-destruct sequence before it was too late. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the corridor outside. "Check that panel." "I think I heard something." Paul froze, his heart pounding in his chest. They were onto him. He was trapped. A moment later, the compartment door hissed open, revealing a group of Obsidian Guard soldiers, led by a high-ranking officer, his face hidden behind a black visor. "Well, well, well," the officer said, his voice cold and menacing. "What do we have here? What do we have here?" The guttural voice, permeated with a harsh Daxamite dialect Paul barely recognized, sliced through the tense silence. Plasma fire scorched the air an instant later. Paul shoved Selene behind the meager cover of a overturned crate, the discharge slamming into the crate's durasteel with a screeching whine. "Selene, are you hit?" He ripped a strip of synth leather from his jacket, ignoring the acrid smell of ozone. "My arm," she gasped, clutching her left bicep. A thin line of cauterized flesh marked where a stray bolt had grazed her. Paul, despite the immediate danger, prioritized Selene's well-being, using his rudimentary first aid knowledge and available materials to create a makeshift bandage for her plasma wound. He pressed the makeshift bandage against the wound, the synth leather doing little to staunch the flow of luminescent Daxamite blood. "Hold this tight. It's not much, but it'll have to do for now." The Obsidian Guard soldiers began cutting through the compartment door, the high-pitched whine of their cutting torches a grating countdown. They knew it couldn't last, so they braced for one last push, their survival slim. He took a thing close by, its weight weak against energy guns. His gaze darted around the cramped compartment, seeking any advantage. Then he noticed a series of intricate symbols etched into the compartment wall, almost hidden beneath a layer of grime. They weren't mere decoration. Paul recognized them as a complex form of Daxamite linguistic code, a script he'd only encountered in ancient restricted texts, potentially a hidden message. Ignoring the imminent breach, the screech of the cutting torches intensifying, Paul focused on deciphering the code, realizing it might contain vital information about Kalen's data or a hidden escape route. He ran his fingers over the cool metal, tracing the elegant curves and sharp angles. "Selene, look at this. Do you recognize this dialect?" Selene, impressed by Paul's dedication and linguistic skills despite the chaos, helped him decipher the code, revealing that the symbols represented a series of access codes for a hidden tunnel network. Those are ventilation access codes, but they're encrypted with a very old key. I haven't seen this sequence used in centuries. As the obsidian guard breached the compartment, the door hissing open with a final tortured groan, Paul and Celine activated the access codes, jabbing at a hidden panel beneath the etched symbols. The wall shimmered, revealing a concealed doorway leading into the ventilation system. They didn't hesitate. Energy blasts echoed off the walls as they moved through the narrow ventilation shafts, avoiding the pursuing Enforcer Guard soldiers, who were too large to fit through the tight spaces. The metal was cold against his skin, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of Daxamite machinery. During their claustrophobic journey, the low thrum of the ship, a constant vibration against their bodies. Celine expressed her gratitude for Paul's unwavering support, her voice barely a whisper above the hum. I never expected to find such a strong connection with a human, Paul. Especially not now. Paul reciprocated her feelings, his heart pounding against his ribs, the adrenaline of the escape mixing with a surge of emotion. Neither did I, Celine. I think I've fallen in love with you. Despite everything, despite the different backgrounds and the perilous circumstances, the words felt clumsy, inadequate, but honest. They reached a junction in the ventilation system, the shaft splitting into two possible routes, one leading towards the ship's bridge, the other towards the engineering section. A dim emergency light flickered, casting long, distorted shadows. Paul recalled that Varus was heading towards the engineering section to disable the self-destruct sequence, realizing that they needed to contact him to assess his progress. Varus, he was going to engineering. We need to know if he succeeded. They chose the route leading towards the engineering section, hoping to rendezvous with Varus and assist him in his mission, knowing that the fate of the ship hung in the balance. The ventilation shaft narrowed, forcing them to crawl on their bellies, the metal grating digging into their skin. As they navigated the ventilation shafts, the silence broken only by their ragged breathing, they overheard a conversation between two Obsidian Guard soldiers, their voices echoing through the metal ducts. It was close, too near. Struck him at the core. The Elder had no chance. System reboot is live. Leader's orders. No loose ends. The words hit Paul like a physical blow, revealing that Varus had been captured and the self-destruct sequence was still active. The soldiers mentioned that Varus was being held in a secure holding cell near the engineering core, and that he was being interrogated for information about Kalen's data. They're trying to get the access codes for Kalen's research. He won't break. But they will kill him. Paul, determined to rescue Varus and disable the self-destruct sequence, his mind racing, devised a plan to infiltrate the holding cell, using his linguistic skills to create a diversion. I can mimic their command codes. Create a false alarm. Draw them away from the cell. Celine, despite her injuries, her face pale but resolute, insisted on assisting Paul, demonstrating her unwavering loyalty and tenacity to protect her people and expose the conspiracy. I'm with you, Paul. We can't let them win. They reached the holding cell, the ventilation shaft opening into a small access panel overlooking the heavily guarded chamber. They discovered that it was heavily guarded and protected by a sophisticated energy shield, humming with almost unchecked power, making a direct assault impossible. Paul noticed a series of control panels near the holding cell, blinking with Daxamite runes and complex circuitry, realizing that they controlled the energy shield and other security systems, offering a potential point of entry. Those panels, they control the shield? If I can just. Paul, using his knowledge of alien technology and linguistic skills, honed through years of studying countless alien cultures, attempted to manipulate the control panels, hoping to disable the energy shield and gain access to the holding cell. He worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. As Paul worked on the control panels, the fate of Varus, the ship, and potentially the entire Daxamite civilization resting on his shoulders, Selene stood guard, her plasma pistol raised, preparing to defend him against any approaching Obsidian Guard soldiers, her breathing shallow, her eyes scanning the corridor, a tense cliffhanger hanging in the air. A low guttural warble echoed through the holding cell block, bathing the corridor in strobing crimson light. Paul cursed under his breath, wrenching his hand away from the control panel. Security alarm. Obsidian Guard incoming. Selene reacted instantly. I'll handle them. Give me time. Without waiting for a response, she spun, drawing a sleek, curved blade from beneath her robes. The approaching footsteps grew louder, punctuated by the metallic clang of armored boots on the deck plating. Selene moved with a fluid grace that belied her delicate appearance, positioning herself to intercept the guards at the corridor's narrowest point. Her violet eyes narrowed, focusing on the approaching threat. Paul returned to the control panel, his fingers flying across the intricate Daxamite script. The encryption algorithm swam before his eyes, a complex web of interlocking symbols that seemed to shift and change with every passing second. He muttered to himself, "Come on, Thompson, think. There's got to be a key." Then, a flicker of recognition. A specific linguistic pattern, a subtle inflection Kalen had used when reciting ancient Daxamite poetry, clicked into place. He input the sequence, his heart pounding in his chest. As he entered the final symbol, the lights in the holding cell flickered, then died. A rasping cough echoed from within. Paul's blood ran cold. He'd accidentally disabled the life support system. Selene's voice, strained but firm, cut through the darkness. "Paul, hurry. He won't last long." Working frantically, Paul rerouted power, bypassing safety protocols. The encryption dissolved, revealing a string of primary security code. He input them, one by one, but as the final code locked into place, a shimmering field of energy sprang into existence, bathing the holding cell in an eerie blue glow. A secondary energy shield. "Damn it!" Paul exclaimed, hitting his fist against the console. He scanned the remaining controls, desperately searching for a solution. Then his gaze fell upon a diagram of the ship's energy distribution system etched into the panel casing. He remembered seeing a similar schematic during his initial tour of the flagship. The secondary shield was powered by a separate energy conduit, isolated from the main grid. A dangerous idea sparked in his mind. He rerouted power from a non-essential system, the environmental regulators for a rarely used cargo bay, channeling it directly into the shield conduit. The panels sparked and hissed, overloaded circuits venting plumes of superheated gas. The strobing alarm intensified, and a synthesized voice blared through the ship. "Warning. Energy surge detected in holding cell block Gamma. Security breach imminent." The secondary shield flickered, sputtered, and vanished. Paul didn't hesitate. He slammed the release, and the holding cell door hissed open, revealing Varus slumped against the far wall, his skin tinged with an unnatural violet hue, his chest barely rising and falling. Selene, having dispatched the last of the guards, rushed to his side. Her fingers flew across Varus's throat, locating a pressure point. She applied precise, controlled pressure, restoring a semblance of rhythm to his ragged breathing. Paul, meanwhile, slapped Varus's face, trying to rouse him. "Varus, wake up!" Varus gasped, his eyes fluttering open. "The self-destruct. I disabled part of it." He coughed, a thin stream of blood trickling from his lips. "But fails safe. Manual override. Engineering core." Paul exchanged a grim look with Celine. "Engineering core? How heavily guarded are we talking?" "Obsidian guard everywhere," Varus rasped. "And a Zidonian rogue scientist obsessed with Kalen's data." The ship-wide alert intensified, the strobing lights flashing faster, the synthesized voice growing louder. "Intrusion detected. Holding cell block Gamma. All Obsidian Guard units report to Engineering Core." "Security level red. They're closing in," Paul said, his voice tight. "We need a plan, and fast." He scanned the corridor, his eyes searching for an escape route. "The ventilation system. It's our best shot. It'll be tight, but it could get us close to the Engineering Core." Celine stepped forward, her expression resolute. "I'll lead the diversion. I know the ventilation shafts. You get Varus in range." "Celine, that's reckless," Paul remarked. "It's essential," she said, her voice firm. "You need to bypass that lock, Paul. Kalen's life, the fate of our people depends on it." She placed a hand on his cheek, her violet eyes locking with his. "Trust me." Paul hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." Celine squeezed his hand, then turned to Varus. "Can you walk?" Varus nodded weakly, allowing Celine to help him to his feet. "All right," Paul said, steeling himself. "Celine, you head for the ventilation system. Varus, you're with me. We're going to the Engineering Core." Celine disappeared into the shadows, heading towards the ventilation shaft access panel. Paul and Varus moved in the opposite direction, towards the heavily guarded Engineering Core. As they rounded a corner, they saw a flashing display panel. Paul cursed. "Damn it! The self-destruct sequence. It's accelerating. We've only got minutes." The hiss was immediate, insidious. Not the sharp, clean expulsion of air, but a wet, almost organic sound, like a lung collapsing. Paul coughed, the metallic tang of the neurotoxin already coating his tongue. Varus groaned, clutching his side, his breathing ragged. The Obsidian Guard soldiers, clad in their black armor, stood frozen for a heartbeat, then began to convulse, collapsing in silent heaps. Celine's diversion had bought them time, but this was a death sentence. Paul slapped a hand over his mouth, trying to filter the air. "Varus, can you? Override. No time." Varus gasped, his face slick with sweat. "Toxin. Fast-acting. Must. Disable. Dispersal." He pointed a trembling finger towards a series of conduits snaking across the ceiling. "Central regulator. Behind. Panel." Ignoring the burning in his lungs, Paul scrambled towards the indicated panel, a section of the wall subtly different in texture from the rest. He ripped it open, revealing a nest of wires and glowing components. He recognized the basic principles: pressure regulators, flow controls, but the specifics of the Daxamite design were alien. A warning klaxon blared, its tone rising in pitch. Through the widening gaps in the floor plating where the neurotoxin emitters were housed, a sickly green mist began to swirl. He needed to focus. Think. Human ingenuity. That's what Celine believed in. What he needed to believe in. He pulled out his multi-tool, the Terran-made device feeling strangely primitive amidst the advanced alien technology. He began tracing the flow of the neurotoxin, his linguistic training surprisingly useful in deciphering the cryptic symbols etched onto the conduits. He could almost feel the system, the way it pulsed and breathed, a mechanical mimicry of a living organism. A shot rang out, ricocheting off the metal walls. One of the obsidian guard, not quite dead, had managed to raise his weapon. Paul ducked, narrowly avoiding the energy blast. He risked a glance. 2 more guards were stirring, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, but still deadly. Celine's diversion had thinned their ranks, but these few were enough. Varus, cover me! Varus, despite his injury, managed to raise his disruptor pistol, firing a wobbly shot that struck one of the guards, causing his energy shield to flicker and die. The guard crumpled, twitching. But the other was already advancing, his weapon trained on Paul. Damn it! He needed more time. He ripped a handful of wires from the control panel, ignoring the sparking and crackling. He had a hunch, a desperate gamble, based on his understanding of fluid dynamics. He crossed 2 of the severed wires, bracing himself. The klaxon abruptly cut out. The green mist stopped swirling. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, with a groan of tortured metal, the ventilation system reversed. The neurotoxin, instead of filling the room, began to be sucked back into the emitters. It had worked. For now. But the obsidian guard was still coming. He turned back to the control panel, his fingers flying across the alien interface. He needed to disable the remaining security layers, to stop the self-destruct sequence. Then the hologram flickered into existence, the image of the rogue Zidonian scientist, his crystalline face twisted into a sneer. Impressive, human, but you cannot stop what is already in motion. The destruction of this ship, and the data it carries, is inevitable. Paul ignored him, focusing on the complex equations scrolling across the screen. You think you are saving lives? You are merely delaying the inevitable. That data, it is too dangerous. It contains the key to unlocking technology that could destroy the galaxy. I am preventing a greater catastrophe. Paul paused, his fingers hovering over a control rune. What technology? The scientist's eyes narrowed. It is beyond your comprehension. Let it be lost. For the good of all. He activated another sequence on his end. The panel in front of Paul went dead, plunging the engineering core into near darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The neurotoxin was merely a deterrent. Now, you face a more permanent solution. The core is now sealed, and the self-destruct sequence is irreversible. The hologram vanished. Paul was left in the dim, silent engineering core, the weight of the scientist's words pressing down on him. He glanced at Varus, who was slumped against a wall, his face pale. He had to find a way out. He had to stop the self-destruct. He had to protect Kalen, Celine, everyone on board. But how? But how? Paul muttered, his gaze darting across the schematic of the neurotoxin dispersal system. He tapped furiously at the console, bringing up molecular diagrams, cross-referencing them against known antidotes. Modified fluorocarbon base, resonant frequency dispersal. Damn it, they designed this to bypass standard filtration. Varus, leaning heavily against a wall, his face pale despite his dark skin, spoke, his voice raspy. The Daxamite military. We used focused energy pulses to disrupt molecular bonds. Perhaps a concentrated burst tuned to the right frequency. He coughed, wincing. It's how we disabled enemy drone swarms. Paul's eyes widened. A disruptor pistol. Modify it to generate a specific energy pulse. It might work. He grabbed a disruptor pistol from a nearby weapons rack, his fingers already flying across its control panel. But the power requirements, this modification will be unstable. One wrong setting, and we're looking at a catastrophic explosion. A warning klaxon blared as he bypassed safety protocols, sweat beading on his forehead. Outside the engineering core, Celine, her face grim, ran her hand along the cold, metallic wall. "There has to be a way to slow it down," she whispered, her fingers tracing the contours of the wall. Suddenly, her fingers snagged on a barely perceptible seam, a hidden maintenance access panel. She pulled it open, revealing a cramped space filled with conduits and wire. A ventilation control hub. Inside, Celine worked quickly, rerouting the airflow, her movements precise and efficient. If I can create a localized vacuum within the core, she thought, it might buy them some time. She sealed off several sections, diverting the main airflow. Back in the core, Paul finished the modification, his hands shaking slightly. The disruptor pistol hummed with unstable energy, the air around it crackling. "Here goes nothing," he muttered. He aimed the pistol at the neurotoxin dispersal unit, took a deep breath, and fired. A blinding flash filled the core, followed by a high-pitched whine. The neurotoxin, visible as a shimmering green mist, dissipated instantly. But the power surge was catastrophic. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and several consoles went dark. "Damn it!" Paul exclaimed. "The environmental controls, they're offline." Almost immediately, the temperature began to plummet. Condensation formed on the walls, and Paul shivered, pulling his synth leather jacket tighter. Varus coughed, his breath misting in the air. Hypothermia. Not good. As Paul and Varus struggled to restore the environmental controls, a series of shimmering energy barriers suddenly materialized, blocking access to the main control panel. They pulsed with an eerie violet light. A voice, cold and devoid of emotion, echoed through the core. "Impressive, Envoy Thompson, but your efforts are futile." The rogue scientist. "These energy barriers are powered by a far more potent source than you can imagine. Kalen's own bioenergy, siphoned directly from his life force." Celine, her face etched with horror, stared at the monitors displaying Kalen's vital signs. They were plummeting. "No," she whispered. She frantically manipulated the controls at the external console, desperately trying to sever the energy link. Paul, his gaze fixed on the energy barriers, noticed a subtle pattern in their fluctuations. A rhythmic pulse. He glanced at a nearby monitor displaying Kalen's brainwave patterns. The two were perfectly synchronized. "Wait a minute," he murmured. "The energy barriers, they're responding to Kalen's brainwaves." He turned to Varus, his eyes shining with sudden understanding. "The Daxamites, you have meditative techniques, don't you? Ways to control bioenergy flow?" Varus nodded weakly. "Ancient practices, used for healing, for mental discipline." "I think I can disrupt these barriers," Paul said, his voice rising with excitement. "If I can mimic the sonic frequencies of a specific meditative technique, it might create a feedback loop, weaken the connection." Paul began typing furiously at a console, his xenolinguistic skills coming to the fore. He translated the complex Daxamite meditative technique into a series of sonic frequencies. cross-referencing them with known energy patterns. He transmitted the sonic frequencies into the engineering core. The energy barriers flickered violently, their violet light dimming. "It's working!" Paul exclaimed. The rogue scientist's voice crackled over the comm system. "A clever trick, human, but easily countered." The energy barriers intensified, their violet light burning brighter. But Kalen's life signs on the monitor plummeted even faster. Varus, his face contorted with pain, grabbed Paul's arm. "Stop, Thompson! You're killing him! Find another way, even if it means sacrificing me." Paul shook his head, his expression resolute. "I'm not giving up, Varus. I'm not letting either of you die." Outside, Celine cried out in triumph. "I've partially disrupted the energy link. It's creating a feedback loop." The energy barriers overloaded, sparking and crackling violently. A temporary opening appeared, a gap in the shimmering violet field. "Now!" Celine screamed over the comm. Paul didn't hesitate. He sprinted towards the main control panel, dodging sparks and falling debris, and initiated the next stage of the override sequence. Suddenly, a holographic image of the rogue scientist flickered into existence above the control panel, a triumphant smirk on his face. "You may have overcome my initial defenses, Envoy Thompson," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "But the final stage of the override requires a biological key, Kalen's unique genetic code, and I doubt you have access to that. There has to be something," Paul repeated, more to himself than to Celine, his gaze fixed on the inert, crystalline tools the Zidonians had left behind. "Some way to get a complete genetic sample." Celine's slender, three-fingered hand rested on Kalen's bioluminescent silk covering. "The Zidonians possess the most advanced sequencing technology in the galaxy. If they cannot, they won't," Paul corrected gently. "They won't try. There's a difference. We need to think outside their protocols." He glanced around the chamber, his eyes lingering on the Daxamite symbols woven into the tapestries. "What about more? Traditional method?" Celine frowned, her amber eyes clouding with confusion. "Traditional? You suggest we abandon advanced science for folklore?" "Not folklore," Paul countered, stepping closer. "Culture. Every culture has its own way of understanding the body, of healing." "What about accessing his genetic memory?" Celine's eyes widened slightly. "The Ankar? The ancestral echo?" She shook her head. "It is theoretical. The genetic code, they say, holds echoes of our ancestors, their knowledge, their experiences. But to access it, it requires a deep connection, a resonance that few can achieve, especially with one so weakened." "But Kalen is a revered elder," Paul pressed. "If anyone possesses that connection, it would be him, and you as his granddaughter. You might be able to help him focus." A flicker of hope ignited in Celine's eyes. She led Paul to a smaller, more secluded alcove within the chamber, where ancient Daxamite instruments lay carefully preserved. Crystalline chimes, resonating bowls crafted from polished moonstone, and intricately carved bone flutes. These were used by the Ankara, the memory weavers. They believed sound could unlock the secrets within our very being. They prepared the alcove, arranging the instruments around Kalen's bed. Celine, her voice a low, melodic hum, began to chant in the ancient Daxamite tongue. The crystalline chimes resonated with a pure, ethereal tone, while Paul watched Kalen's face, searching for any sign of response. The air thrummed with barely perceptible energy, but Kalen remained still, his breathing shallow and ragged. Fragmented images flickered across Celine's face, a crystalline city shimmering under twin suns, a bioluminescent forest teeming with life, a dark, shadowed figure. But they were fleeting, indistinct, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Celine stopped chanting, her face etched with disappointment. His spirit, it is too weak. The connection, it cannot hold. Paul sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, so the spiritual approach is a dead end for now. What about something more? Direct, advanced, scanning technology? Extracting the genetic code directly from his cells? Celine recoiled slightly. That would be dangerous. The Zidonians' methods are invasive, even harmful. I will not risk further injury to my grandfather. But what choice do we have? Paul asked, his voice tinged with frustration. We need his genetic code. It's the key to understanding what's happening to him. There must be another way, Celine insisted, her voice trembling. A way that does not involve risking his life. We're already risking his life by doing nothing, Paul countered, his tone softening. Look, I understand your concern, but we need to weigh the risks and benefits. If we can get his genetic code, we might be able to save him. If we do nothing, he's almost certainly going to die. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. Finally, Celine nodded, her face etched with persistence. Very well. But we proceed with extreme caution. I will monitor every fluctuation in his vital signs. The moment his condition worsens, we stop. Paul nodded in agreement. He retrieved a compact scanning device from his bag, a piece of Terran technology far less bulky and intrusive than the Zidonian equipment. As he initiated the scanning process, a holographic display flickered to life, showing a complex map of Kalen's cellular structure. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the chamber. The holographic display flickered erratically, and Kalen's vital signs plummeted. Celine cried out in alarm, rushing to his side. What's happening? Paul demanded, frantically adjusting the scanner settings. The scanning is triggering a feedback loop, Celine exclaimed, her fingers flying across a nearby control panel. His energy field? It's destabilizing. Before Paul could react, a new security protocol activated, severing all external access to Kalen's biosignature. A distorted voice echoed through the chamber, infused with mocking laughter. Foolish mortals! Did you truly believe you could unravel the secrets of the Daxamite elders with your primitive tools? Your efforts are futile. Paul smacked his palm against the scanner in frustration. That rogue scientist, he's deliberately sabotaging us. Lead medic Xyla, his crystalline features impassive, entered the chamber. Envoy Thompson, your unauthorized actions have further compromised the patient's condition. While extraordinary intervention remains outside Concordance parameters, I am authorized to provide a Zidonian device capable of monitoring the patient's brainwave activity. Such observation falls within acceptable parameters. He gestured to a hovering device that silently positioned itself near Kalen's head. Perhaps you will find some solace in observing the inevitable. Paul glared at Xyla, suspecting a hidden motive behind his seemingly helpful gesture. He turned his attention to the brainwave monitor, its screen displaying a complex array of oscillating patterns. As he studied the patterns, he noticed an unusual repetitive sequence, a subtle anomaly amidst the chaotic fluctuations. Suddenly, a cryptic message appeared on a nearby console, its characters glowing with an eerie luminescence. His genetic code is the key. Unlock the past. Unlock the truth. What does it mean? Celine whispered, her voice filled with apprehension. As if in response, Kalen stirred, his eyes fluttering open. His gaze, clouded with pain and confusion, focused on Paul. His lips moved, forming a single whispered word, "Ethel." Then his eyes closed, and he fell back into unconsciousness. "Ethel?" Paul repeated, his mind racing. "What does that mean?" Celine's eyes widened. "That is an archaic term rarely used. It refers to a hidden place, a chamber, perhaps." They exchanged a look of dawning realization. "A hidden location," Paul said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere holding something important." Celine rushed to the ship's database, her fingers flying across the controls. Paul, meanwhile, consulted ancient Daxamite maps etched onto crystalline tablets. After what seemed like an eternity, Celine gasped. "I found it. An archaic reference to a hidden chamber within Kalen's private quarters. It is said to be concealed behind a seemingly ordinary wall panel." They raced to Kalen's quarters, their hearts pounding with anticipation. After a frantic search, Paul ran his hand along a seemingly seamless wall panel, feeling for any sign of a hidden mechanism. Finally, his fingers brushed against a barely perceptible indentation. He pressed it, and with a soft hiss the panel slid open, revealing a hidden chamber. The chamber was small and dimly lit, filled with Kalen's personal effects, ancient scrolls, crystalline sculptures, and a collection of intricately carved boxes. Paul's gaze fell upon a small, unassuming data storage device, its surface etched with swirling Daxamite symbols. "His genetic code," Celine breathed, her voice filled with awe. "It must be here." Paul carefully retrieved the device and connected it to his scanner. The screen flickered to life, displaying fragmented segments of genetic code, corrupted and incomplete. "It's not whole," Paul said, his voice infused with disappointment. "It's been deliberately broken apart, but maybe, just maybe, with the right decryption key, or supplementary data, Celine finished, her voice barely a whisper. Paul stepped closer to the holographic display, the fragmented genetic code shimmering before him. "Then that's what we need to find. More data. This code. It's like a language, and we're missing half the vocabulary." He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze intense. "I'm cross-referencing what we have with known Daxamite genetic sequences, but the matches are partial at best. It's like trying to understand a sentence with every other word missing." Celine's violet eyes widened slightly. "There is a legend, an old one, about Aethelgard, a mythical Daxamite archivist said to possess the key to unlocking all hidden knowledge." "Ethelgard?" Paul echoed, intrigued. "Never heard of her. Is this a real person or a story?" "It is. Both, perhaps," Celine said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Aethelgard is said to have lived millennia ago, during the Great Consolidation. She was the keeper of the Grand Archive, before it was lost." Paul leaned forward. "Lost? How do you lose an archive?" Celine shrugged, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "The stories vary. Some say it was destroyed in a war. Others claim it was hidden, protected by a series of trials. If Ethelgard truly existed, and if her archives still remain, it might contain the supplementary data we need." They spent the next hour scouring the ship's databanks, searching for any mention of Ethelgard or the lost archive. Cryptic references emerged, faded entries in ancient texts, fragmented star charts with annotations in archaic Daxamite, whispers of a hidden library located somewhere within the flagship itself. Suddenly, the main view screen flickered, replaced by a distorted holographic image, a figure cloaked in shadows. His voice, a raspy, synthesized growl, filled the bridge. So, the little linguist and the grieving granddaughter are playing detective. How predictable. Paul stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. Show yourself. The figure chuckled, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. Patience, Envoy Thompson. You will meet me soon enough. I simply wish to inform you that your little quest for Aethelgard's archive has become significantly more dangerous. I have taken the liberty of booby-trapping the archive, a little bioweapon, guaranteed to make your search unforgettable. The image flickered and vanished, leaving Paul and Celine in stunned silence. Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A bioweapon? In the archive? Paul turned to her, his expression grim. He's trying to scare us off, but he also confirmed it exists. Kaelin's genetic code is likely stored there, Celine. We can't just walk away. But the risk, Celine whispered, her voice trembling. What if it's a trap? What if we unleash something terrible? Paul considered the options, his mind racing. We need to find a way to scan the archive remotely. See what we're dealing with before we go in. Xyla's brainwave monitoring device. It's sensitive enough to pick up subtle energy signatures. Maybe it can detect the bioweapon's presence. Celine looked doubtful. Xyla would never agree. It's against concordance regulations. The device is only for monitoring Kaelin's vital signs. I know, Paul said, a glint in his eyes. But Xyla is also a scientist. And scientists are curious. We just need to appeal to his intellectual vanity. They found Xyla in the medical bay, meticulously calibrating a diagnostic tool. Paul approached him cautiously. Lead medic Xyla, we require your assistance. Xyla turned, his crystalline eyes devoid of emotion. My priority is the Elder's well-being. I have no time for distractions. This concerns the Elder's well-being, Paul countered, his voice firm. We believe the key to stabilizing his condition lies within Aethelgard's archive. However, we have reason to believe the archive is booby trapped with a bioweapon. Xyla's head tilted slightly, a flicker of something akin to interest in his eyes. A bioweapon? What evidence do you possess? Paul explained their encounter with the rogue scientist. We need to scan the archive remotely, identify the bioweapon's signature, and hopefully disarm it before entering. Your brainwave monitoring device is the only technology on this ship sensitive enough to penetrate the archive's shielding. Xyla remained silent for a moment, processing the information. Concordance regulations strictly prohibit the use of medical equipment for non-medical purposes. But, Paul pressed, a scan could yield valuable data about the bioweapon itself. Its composition, its method of attack, information that could be crucial in developing a countermeasure. Surely that aligns with your scientific mandate. Xyla's multifaceted eyes seemed to glint. A purely theoretical analysis, of course. Any practical application would be strictly hypothetical. He paused, then added, I will provide you with a modified version of the device. It can penetrate the archive's shielding, but be warned, the energy feedback could be unpredictable, and I will only authorize a limited scan, no prolonged exposure. With Xyla's grudging consent, they set up the modified brainwave scanner in a secluded chamber near the archive entrance. Paul carefully calibrated the device. while Celine monitored Kaelin's vital signs on a separate console. As the scan commenced, a low hum filled the chamber. Kaelin's brainwave activity, displayed on Celine's monitor, began to spike erratically. His body convulsed slightly, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Paul, something's happening," Celine cried, her voice filled with alarm. "His neural activity is off the charts. He's experiencing something." Visions flashed across Kaelin's mind, fragmented images of ancient Daxamite cities, long-forgotten battles, faces of people he had loved and lost. Memories, vivid and intense, flooded his consciousness. Celine, witnessing Kaelin's distress, reached for the power switch. "We have to stop this! It's hurting him!" But as her fingers touched the switch, the device malfunctioned. A surge of energy erupted, engulfing Celine in a blinding flash of light. She cried out, her body rigid, her eyes wide with terror. Then silence. Paul rushed to her side, shaking her gently. "Celine. Celine, are you all right?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were unfocused, distant. "Paul," she whispered, her voice faint and distorted. I'm inside his mind. I'm trapped." Paul's blood ran cold. He knew what he had to do. He took a deep breath, steeling his perseverance. He had spent years studying alien languages, deciphering complex codes, understanding the nuances of alien thought. Now he had to apply that knowledge in the most desperate way imaginable. "Hold on, Celine," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I'm coming in after you." He adjusted the settings on the brainwave scanner, focusing his intent, channeling his energy. He closed his eyes and took a leap of faith, plunging into the chaotic landscape of Kaelin's mind. He found himself standing in a vast, surreal landscape. Towering crystal structures pierced the sky, casting long, distorted shadows. The air hummed with an alien energy, and the ground beneath his feet pulsed with a strange, rhythmic beat. Before him, a figure materialized, a shimmering, ethereal being with violet eyes and flowing silver hair. She radiated an aura of immense power and ancient wisdom. "Welcome, traveler," she said, her voice echoing through the mental landscape. "I am Aethelgard, and you have entered my archive. Be warned, the path ahead is fraught with peril. Only those with the purest intentions and the sharpest minds may pass." Within Kaelin's mind, Paul found Celine disoriented but unharmed. "Paul, what are you doing here?" "It's too dangerous." "I'm here to get you out," he said, his gaze determined, "and to find the key to saving Kaelin." Ethelgard's form shimmered. "The archive is protected by a series of mental puzzles and challenges. You must work together to solve them. Only then will you unlock the secrets you seek." And so they began their journey through the labyrinthine corridors of Kaelin's mind, facing trials that tested their knowledge, their courage, and their bond. They deciphered ancient Daxamite riddles, navigated treacherous memoriscapes, and battled manifestations of Kaelin's deepest fear. As they progressed, they uncovered hidden memories of Kaelin's past, his triumphs, his failures, his sacrifices. They learned of a secret pact he had made long ago, a pact to protect a powerful artifact from falling into the wrong hands. But they were not alone. The rogue scientists, sensing their progress, attempted to sabotage their efforts, manipulating Kaelin's memories, creating illusions and traps to ensnare them. Despite the scientists' interference, Paul and Celine persevered, drawing upon their combined knowledge of Daxamite history, science, and language. They solved each puzzle, overcame each challenge, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle they faced. Finally, They reached the heart of the archive, a vast chamber filled with swirling energy. In the center of the chamber, a holographic projection shimmered Kalen's complete genetic code, protected by a final, seemingly impossible puzzle. Ethelgard's voice echoed through the chamber. "This is the ultimate test. To unlock this code, you must confront your deepest fears and insecurities. Only then will you be worthy." Celine stepped forward, her eyes filled with newfound strength and confidence. She had faced her own doubts, her own insecurities, and emerged stronger than ever before. With a surge of grit, she solved the puzzle, unlocking the complete genetic code and deactivating the bioweapon. The chamber pulsed with energy, then fell silent. As Paul and Celine emerged from Kalen's mind, they found themselves back in the chamber near the archive entrance. Kalen's vital signs had stabilized, and Celine seemed to be unharmed. But something was wrong. The chamber felt different. A sense of unease settled over Paul. He turned to Xyla, who was standing near the entrance, his expression unreadable. "Lead medic, Xyla," Paul said, his voice cautious. "What's going on?" Xyla's crystalline eyes glinted. "I have contacted the Concordance. They are aware of your unauthorized activities. They have dispatched a security team to apprehend you." Paul's heart sank. "You betrayed us?" Xyla shrugged. "I followed protocol. Your actions were a clear violation of Concordance regulations." Suddenly, the chamber doors hissed open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. The rogue scientist, his face now visible, his eyes burning with malice. He held a weapon in his hand, pointed directly at Kalen, who was still unconscious on the medical bed. "The game is over, Envoy Thompson." The scientist snarled. "Hand over the genetic code or the old man dies." "Needs," Paul finished, his voice barely a whisper. He turned towards the rogue scientist, his eyes narrowed. "What do you gain from this? Kalen's genetic code could save your people, give them a future. Why are you doing this?" He kept his voice level, trying to appeal to any lingering sense of logic or former scientific idealism. Celine, however, didn't share Paul's optimism. She subtly shifted her weight, positioning herself between the scientist and Kalen, her hand instinctively moving towards the small disruptor pistol concealed beneath her ceremonial robe. She sensed something deeply wrong, a manic energy radiating from the scientist that spoke of something far beyond scientific curiosity. The rogue scientist chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent a shiver down Paul's spine. "Save them? Oh, I intend to save them from themselves." He gestured wildly with the data slate. "This isn't about preservation, human. It's about purification. I've isolated the specific genetic markers that make the Daxamites weak, susceptible to disease, prone to infighting. I'm going to weaponize them, create a virus that targets only those markers. A selective pruning, if you will." Holographic simulations flickered on the slate, showing a virus spreading through Daxamite populations, leaving only a select few untouched. Before Paul could react, a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. "Enough, Davok," Xyla's chime-like voice cut through the air. "Your methods are unorthodox." Paul frowned. "Xyla, what's going on?" Xyla ignored him, his multi-faceted eyes fixed on the rogue scientist, Davok. "The Concord does not condone indiscriminate genetic alteration." Davok laughed, a high-pitched hysterical sound. "Indiscriminate? I assure you, my dear Xyla, it's anything but indiscriminate. It's precise, elegant, necessary." He raised a hand, and two hulking figures emerged from the shadows, flanking Xyla. It was then that Paul realized the horrifying truth. Xyla wasn't there to stop Davok, he was working with him. Xyla's crystalline face remained impassive, but his voice took on a chillingly cold tone. The galaxy is plagued by weakness, by species clinging to outdated ideologies and flawed genetic structures. We must cull the weak to make way for a stronger, more efficient future. He nodded to the figures beside him, and they lunged at Paul and Celine. Chaos erupted. Celine, expecting the strike, used her weapon, but one of them blocked it with a force field. Paul, caught off guard, threw himself in front of Kaelin's bed, shielding the dying elder from the crossfire. Energy blasts ricocheted off the walls, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning synth flesh. Paul grabbed a discarded data slate and used it as a makeshift shield, deflecting a blast that would have surely killed him. He knew they were outmatched. He was a linguist, not a soldier. Celine, despite her training, was clearly struggling against the superior strength and weaponry of their attackers. Suddenly a blast struck Celine, sending her sprawling to the ground. She had thrown herself in front of Kaelin, taking the hit meant for him. "Celine!" Paul cried, scrambling towards her. He saw a scorch mark blooming on her chest, the air around it shimmering with heat. He knew Daxamite physiology, at least theoretically. That looked bad. Davok seized the opportunity. While Paul was distracted, he lunged towards Kaelin, syringe in hand. "Goodbye, Elder," he hissed, injecting the dying Daxamite with a modified version of the virus. "Your genetic code is now useless." Paul, seeing what was happening, roared with fury. He tackled Davok, sending them both crashing to the ground. He wrestled the syringe from Davok's grasp and hurled it across the room. Davok, however, simply smiled. "Too late, human. I've already activated the fail-safe." He pressed a button on his wrist-mounted device, and the holographic projection of Kaelin's genetic code shimmered, flickered, and then shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Paul stared in disbelief. The genetic code, their only hope, was gone. Kaelin was dying, and there was nothing he could do. Celine lay injured, and Xyla, the supposed ally, had betrayed them all. Xyla, seeing that his plan had succeeded, melted back into the shadows, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The galaxy will thank us for this." Difficult, but necessary decision. He and his henchmen disappeared, leaving Paul and Celine to face the consequences of their failure. Paul knelt beside Celine, his hands trembling as he tried to assess her injuries. The scorch mark was spreading, and her breathing was shallow and ragged. He knew he had to get her to a medical facility, and fast. Daxamite physiology was complex, and he was woefully unprepared to deal with this. "Celine, stay with me," he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to get you help." Kaelin, his breathing even more labored than before, reached out a frail hand and grasped Paul's arm. "Paul, listen," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "The archive, off-ship, another source." Paul leaned closer, straining to hear. "What archive, Kaelin?" "Where?" Celine, drifting in and out of consciousness, weakly echoed Kaelin's words. "The archive. Paul, you must stop him." Paul looked from Celine to Kaelin, his mind racing. What archive were they talking about? What was off-ship? He had no idea, but he knew he had to find out. It was their only hope. He gently laid Celine back down and turned to Kaelin's quarters, searching frantically. He ran his hands along the walls, feeling for hidden compartments. Finally, his fingers brushed against a slight indentation. He pressed it, and a small panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled in a bed of velvet, was a small encrypted data chip. He grabbed the chip, his heart pounding with hope. This had to be it. This had to be the key to saving the Daxamites. He rushed back to Celine, inserting the chip into his portable data reader. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single line of text. Requires decryption key. Authorization. Daxamite Elder Council. Paul swore under his breath. Of course, it couldn't be that easy. He needed a decryption key, and that key was held by a select few Daxamite elders. Elders who were likely scattered across the galaxy. He looked at Celine, her face pale and drawn. He had to find a way to contact those elders, to get the decryption key, but that meant leaving the ship, exposing himself to the rogue scientist and his allies. He pulled out his comm device and sent a coded message to a trusted contact within the Daxamite government, a low-level administrator he had befriended during his diplomatic mission. He requested assistance in locating the elders and obtaining the decryption key, knowing that the message could be intercepted at any moment. As he prepared to leave the ship, he knelt beside Celine, taking her hand in his. "I'm going to do everything I can to stop him, Celine," he vowed, his voice filled with purpose. "I promise you, I won't let him win. I will avenge you, and I will honor Kalen's dying wish." Unbeknownst to Paul, his actions were being monitored. On a nearby comm channel, Xyla contacted Davok. "The human is leaving the ship," he reported, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's heading for the off-ship archive. I've sent you the coordinates. I can assist in his capture." Davok chuckled. "Excellent, Xyla. Let's set a little trap for our compassionate friend. He won't know what hit him." Paul, unaware of the trap that awaited him, boarded a small shuttle and set course for the coordinates provided by Kalen. He stared out at the vast expanse of space, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and dread. He was a linguist, not a warrior. But he was also a human, and he wasn't about to stand by and watch while an entire species was wiped out. The shuttle approached a desolate, seemingly abandoned space station, drifting silently in the void. The station was old, its hull scarred and pitted by meteor strikes. It looked like it hadn't been used in centuries. This was the location of the off-ship archive, the last hope for the Daxamite. As Paul's shuttle docked with the station, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, but he had no choice. He had to press on. He had to find a way to save the Daxamites, even if it meant risking his own life. An unknown danger awaited him in the silent, abandoned station. The docking clamps engaged with a muted thud, but the silence that followed was too profound. Paul's internal alarms blared. This wasn't the quiet of an abandoned station. It was the silence of a carefully laid trap. Multiple life signs flickered on his scanner, hidden behind layers of sophisticated dampening fields, and the station's security grid hummed with latent power. He was walking into a viper's nest. Before he could initiate an emergency jump, the corridor ahead shimmered. Xyla, his crystalline features betraying a flicker of something akin to triumph, materialized alongside the rogue Daxamite scientist, his face contorted with bitter satisfaction. They blocked the only exit. "Envoy Thompson," Xyla's voice chimed, the sound devoid of its usual clinical detachment. "Your interference ends here. With the Elder silenced and you neutralized, the Concord will ensure the Daxamite problem is permanently determinationed." The rogue scientist stepped forward, his voice a venomous hiss. "We will use this station's defense grid to obliterate any remaining Daxamite vessels. Their precious genetic archive will be lost forever, and their pathetic pleas for help will be silenced in the cold vacuum of space." Paul's mind raced. He needed a diversion, something to disrupt their carefully orchestrated plan. Recalling a forgotten detail from the station's schematics, a redundant power coupling linked to a disused research sector, he spoke. His voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. He switched to a little-used dialect of Old Zidonian, a language he'd mastered during his xenolinguistics training. "Lead Medic Xyla, are you aware of the structural integrity failings in Sector Gamma 9? The power fluctuations alone could destabilize the entire station." Xyla paused, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. The rogue scientist sputtered, "What trickery is this?" Paul pressed on, injecting a subtle command code into his fabricated warning. "A localized power surge to Sector Gamma 9 will initiate emergency containment protocols, diverting power from essential systems, such as your weapon emplacements." Whether Xyla believed him or simply couldn't afford to ignore the potential threat, the effect was immediate. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and a section of the station plunged into darkness. The security grid flickered, momentarily overwhelmed by the redirected power. "Seal the corridor!" Xyla barked, but Paul was already moving, sprinting back towards the shuttle, then veering sharply into a maintenance tunnel, his synth-leather jacket snagging on exposed wires. He needed to reach the genetic archive, the key to saving Kalen. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He found it a hidden Daxamite research lab, its entrance guarded by automated defenses. Energy weapons swiveled, targeting his every move. A disembodied voice, speaking in ancient Daxamite, echoed through the chamber. "To pass, you must prove your worth. Answer the riddles of the ancestors." Paul recognized the archaic dialect, a language of metaphor and symbolism. He knew he had to think like a Daxamite, to understand their cultural nuances and historical context. The first riddle appeared on a holographic display. "I am born of fire, quenched by tears, and hold the secrets of life within. What am I?" Paul didn't hesitate. "A memory," he replied, "forged in the crucible of experience, preserved by sorrow, and containing the essence of who we are." The energy weapons lowered slightly. A second riddle followed. "I am the bridge between generations, the silent guardian of the past, and the seed of the future." "What am I?" "A genetic code," Paul answered. "The legacy of our ancestors, the blueprint for our descendants, and the unbroken chain of life." The final riddle appeared, more complex than the others. "When is a life truly lost?" Paul paused, considering the weight of the question. He thought of Kalen, fading but not yet gone. He thought of the Daxamite people, teetering on the brink of extinction. "A life is truly lost," he declared, "when its potential is extinguished, when its story is forgotten, and when its capacity for love and connection is denied. The automated defenses deactivated." The door to the genetic archive hissed open. He accessed the archive, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. But his hope quickly turned to dismay. The archive was incomplete, fragmented, missing a crucial sequence needed to synthesize a cure for Kalen's condition. Despair threatened to engulf him, but then he remembered something Kalen had said. A cryptic message delivered during a moment of lucidity. "The heart of life blooms in the shadowed garden. shadowed garden. It had to be a reference to something hidden, something forgotten. Paul searched the lab's database, cross-referencing Kalen's message with ancient Daxamite texts. He found it a hidden chamber containing a living sample of a rare Daxamite plant, the Lumiflora sylvana, rumored to possess unique regenerative properties. He located the chamber, its entrance concealed behind a false wall. Inside, the Lumiflora sylvana pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, its leaves shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Carefully, Paul extracted a sample of the plant's sap, his mind racing. He knew he could combine his knowledge of human and Daxamite biology to unlock its secrets. He set up a makeshift lab, using equipment salvaged from the station. He analyzed the plant's genetic structure, comparing it to the incomplete sequence from the archive. He found it the missing link, the key to synthesizing a cure. As he worked, the door to the lab burst open. Xyla and the rogue scientist stood silhouetted in the doorway, their weapons drawn. "Your game is over, human," the rogue scientist snarled. But then, a figure stepped out from behind them. A junior Zidonian medic, his crystalline features etched with doubt and defiance. He raised his hand, disabling Xyla and the rogue scientist's weapons with a pulse of energy. "This is madness," the medic declared, his voice trembling but firm. "The Concord's mandate is meant to preserve life, not extinguish it. I will not stand by and watch you commit genocide." "You betray us?" Xyla hissed. "I choose life," the medic replied. "Go, Envoy Thompson. Save the Elder." Paul didn't hesitate. He grabbed the synthesized compound and raced back towards the shuttle, Xyla and the rogue scientist hot on his heels. He dodged laser fire, his lungs burning, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the shuttle, sealed the hatch, and initiated the launch sequence. As the shuttle hurtled towards the Daxamite flagship, Paul worked feverishly, synthesizing a dose of the cure. He transmitted the data to the flagship, where Celine stood ready to administer it. On the flagship, Celine injected the cure into Kalen's veins, her hands trembling. She watched, her breath held, as Kalen's vital signs stabilized. His breathing became deeper, his skin regained its color, and his eyes flickered open. Paul received the confirmation. Kalen was stable. Celine was safe. He had done it. Back on the station, the Daxamite government had arrived, apprehending Xyla and the rogue scientist. Justice would be served. As Kalen recovered, he addressed the Daxamite people, his voice weak but clear. "We have been blinded by dogma, shackled by fear," he declared. "But now we have seen the light. We must embrace collaboration with humans, challenge rigid dogmas that hinder progress, and build a future based on empathy, understanding, and mutual respect." On the bridge of the Daxamite flagship, Paul and Celine stood alongside Kalen, looking out at the space station, now bathed in the golden light of a new dawn. The station, once a symbol of betrayal and entrapment, was now a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The rogue scientist's true identity was revealed, a disgraced Daxamite scientist, exiled for unethical experiments, seeking revenge for his banishment. His bitterness had festered, twisting his mind and leading him down a path of destruction. Kalen, now stable, addressed the Daxamites, urging them to embrace collaboration with humans and challenge rigid dogmas that hinder progress. "We must learn from our mistakes," he said, his voice resonating with wisdom and compassion. "We must build a future where knowledge is shared, where empathy guides our actions, and where the potential of every being is celebrated. Paul and Celine stood alongside Kalen, looking towards a future of renewed hope and interspecies cooperation. The space station, once a symbol of division and despair, was now bathed in the warm light of a new dawn, symbolizing a new era of understanding and collaboration. The light glinted off the Lumiflora sylvana saplings Celine held, a tangible symbol of hope for the future, a future where Daxamite and human ingenuity could combine to heal not just bodies, but also the wounds of prejudice and fear. It was a future they would build together.